So, you want to own a 7-Eleven franchise. Sign the agreement, take over a corner store, stock the shelves, ring up the customers around the clock. Sounds like the most accessible franchise on earth. The brand is recognized in dozens of countries. The store is already built. The supply chain is already running. The customers walk in 24 hours a day without any advertising at all. But here's the strange part. 7-Eleven is the largest convenience store chain in the world, and the franchise agreement is one of the most expensive royalty structures in retail. By the end of this video, you'll know how a 7-Eleven franchise actually makes money, why the corporation keeps half of the gross profit, why the franchisee carries almost all the risk, and why people keep signing up anyway. If you want to follow the numbers all the way through, hit subscribe before you forget. It costs nothing, and it keeps videos like this one coming. 7-Eleven franchises come in 3 sizes, and they're 3 completely different businesses. A standard 7-Eleven in a suburban American neighborhood costs around $50,000 to $150,000 in initial franchise fees, plus an inventory deposit of around $20,000 to $40,000. For that money, you get the keys to a store the corporation already owns, a building of around 2,400 to 3,000 square feet, a refrigerated cooler wall, a coffee bar, a Slurpee machine, a hot food case, and a customer base that walks in 24 hours a day. Most of these stores are operated by single-family franchisees who work the counter themselves to keep labor costs down. Profit is thin, hours are brutal. The owner often runs the morning shift, hires staff for the afternoon, and works the closing shift after midnight. A 7-Eleven with a fuel forecourt is a different animal. Think the kind of store you've pulled into at a freeway exit or a major suburban intersection. 6 to 12 fuel dispensers under a canopy, a 3,000 to 4,000 square foot store inside, fresh food preparation, restrooms, and a customer base that includes both fuel buyers and walk-in shoppers. The initial franchise fee runs higher, sometimes $150,000 to $400,000, depending on the location's projected sales volume. The corporation still owns the building, the land, the fuel infrastructure, and the equipment. The franchisee operates the store. And then there's the top of the pyramid. Seven & i Holdings, the Japanese parent company of 7-Eleven, operates over 80,000 stores across 19 countries and generated revenue of over $70 billion in 2023. In the United States alone, 7-Eleven and its sister brand Speedway, acquired from Marathon Petroleum in 2021 for $21 billion, operate over 13,000 locations. These are not corner stores anymore. They are global retail platforms with 85,000 operators paying royalties every single day. But the initial franchise fee is just the start. 2 more costs nobody warns you about. The first is the royalty structure, which is unlike anything else in the franchise world. 7-Eleven does not charge a percentage of gross sales the way McDonald's or Burger King do. 7-Eleven takes a percentage of gross profit, which they call the 7-Eleven charge. The standard rate is around 50% of gross profit, sometimes higher, sometimes negotiated lower in specific markets. Gross profit in this case means sales minus the cost of goods sold. So, if your store generates $1,800,000 in annual sales with a gross profit of $600,000, the corporation takes around $300,000 off the top before you've paid a single employee. The second cost is the rent and the equipment, which the corporation pays for, but the franchisee effectively absorbs through the gross profit split. 7-Eleven owns or leases the building, owns the major equipment, pays the utilities, and pays the rent to the landlord. In exchange, that 50% share of gross profit covers all of those costs, and then some. The corporation argues this structure protects the franchisee from real estate risk, which is partially true. The corporation also captures any real estate appreciation, any rent renegotiation savings, and any equipment efficiency gains. The franchisee captures the labor costs, the shrinkage, the spoiled food, the broken inventory, and the personal time required to run a 24-hour business. Then there's the inventory financing. Every 7-Eleven franchisee operates with what the company calls an open account, which is essentially a running balance with the corporation. The store orders inventory through the approved supply chain. The corporation invoices the franchisee. The franchisee pays out of store revenue. If sales dip and the open account balance climbs, the corporation can require the franchisee to inject additional capital. If shrinkage or inventory variance climbs above acceptable levels, the franchisee absorbs the loss. Even the smallest franchise candidate understands what the corporation has built. 7-Eleven is a brand that prints royalty income from gross profit, controls real estate, controls supply, and decides which products get pushed at the store level. That's why 7 & I Holdings can operate over 80,000 locations globally and still expand. There is always another operator willing to sign, so you've got the store, you've got the contract, you've got the cooler wall, the Slurpee machine, the coffee bar, the staff. The customers are walking in around the clock. Now we get to the question that actually matters. Where does the money come from? The obvious answer is the Slurpees. The hot dogs on the roller grill, the coffee in the morning, the cigarettes behind the counter, the lottery tickets at the register. And all of that is true. But the obvious answer is also the wrong answer. The products on the shelves are not the business. The products on the shelves are the cover charge. The actual business is sitting in Dallas, Texas, in the corporate office of 7-Eleven Incorporated, calculating roughly half of every dollar of gross profit your store generates, whether you make a personal income or not. Every 7-Eleven franchise on earth earns money in 3 completely different categories, and the split is brutal in a way nobody explains to you before you sign. The industry calls them merchandise sales, fresh food, and proprietary beverages. Merchandise sales is everything prepackaged: snacks, cigarettes, beer, where allowed, beverages, household goods. Fresh food is everything prepared in store or delivered fresh daily. Hot dogs, taquitos, pizza, breakfast sandwiches, fresh fruit, salads. Proprietary beverages are the Slurpee, the Big Gulp, the coffee program, and the energy drink fountain. At a typical 7-Eleven, merchandise sales runs around 70% of revenue but only 50% of gross profit. Fresh food runs around 15% of revenue but 20 to 25% of gross profit. Proprietary beverages run around 10% of revenue but 25 to 30% of gross profit. The Slurpee, the cheapest looking product in the store, is the most profitable item in the building. Easiest way to picture it: imagine a customer walks in and buys a pack of cigarettes for $9.99. The cost to the store is around $7.50. The gross profit on that sale is around $2.50. The 7-Eleven charge takes about $1.25 of that. The franchisee keeps the other $1.25 before paying labor, credit card fees, and store supplies. After everything, the franchisee nets maybe 50 cents on a $10 cigarette sale. Now the same customer buys a large Slurpee for $3.49. The cost to the store is around 40 cents in syrup, cup, lid, and straw. The gross profit on that Slurpee is around $3. The 7-Eleven charge takes $1.50. The franchisee keeps $1.50 before operating expenses. After everything, the franchisee nets close to $1 on a $3.49 Slurpee. A frozen drink that costs 40 cents to make generates twice as much take-home profit as a $10 pack of cigarettes. Now multiply that by 2,000 transactions a week. The numbers stop being theoretical. The average 7-Eleven franchise in the United States generates around $1,800,000 to $2,200,000 in annual sales. The gross profit on those sales is around $600,000 to $750,000. The 7-Eleven charge of roughly 50% takes around $300,000 to $375,000 off the top. The franchisee then pays labor of around $150,000 to $200,000 a year, credit card processing fees of around $25,000 to $40,000, store supplies of around $15,000, and miscellaneous operating costs of around $20,000. The franchisee takes home, after everything, around $50,000 to $120,000 a year in actual personal income. Then there's the corporation side of the same transaction. 7-Eleven Incorporated collects roughly 50% of gross profit from every franchised store, every week, regardless of the franchisee's personal take-home. On a store generating $700,000 in gross profit, that's $350,000 per store, per year, flowing to corporate. With over 13,000 stores in the United States alone, the math is staggering. The corporation does not need any individual franchisee to be successful. The corporation needs the store to be open and the gross profit to keep flowing. And here's the part that breaks people's brains. The longer you run the franchise, the more the math compresses. The industry calls it franchisee fatigue. Wages keep climbing, shrinkage keeps creeping. Cigarette tax increases compress margins on the highest volume product category. Energy drink and snack inflation reduces gross profit percentages. But the 7-Eleven charge is calculated on the gross profit the store generates, which means when gross profit dollars climb, the corporation's share climbs proportionally. When gross profit dollars shrink due to cost increases the franchisee cannot pass through, the corporation still takes its 50%. The franchisee absorbs the squeeze. So, now look at the architecture of the agreement. Read any 7-Eleven franchise disclosure document. Notice anything? The corporation owns the real estate, the building, the major equipment, and the brand. The franchisee owns the inventory, the labor, the night shift, the customer complaints, and the personal guarantee on the open account. The corporation controls product selection, supplier relationships, pricing strategy, and store operating standards. The franchisee controls almost nothing of substance. The industry has a term for this kind of structure: asymmetric control. The franchisee carries the operational risk. The corporation carries the brand equity. The psychology of the franchisee is even sharper than the architecture. A first-time 7-Eleven franchisee is a captive customer in a way other franchise systems do not quite replicate. They have signed a long-term agreement, often 10 to 20 years. They have invested their savings into the initial franchise fee and inventory deposit. They have committed to operate a 24-hour business that cannot close without corporate approval. They do not own the building, which means they cannot sell the real estate. They do not own the equipment, which means they cannot liquidate the assets. If they walk away, they lose everything they put in. And at the very top of this pyramid sits the parent company itself. Seven & i Holdings, headquartered in Tokyo, has been one of the most acquisitive convenience retailers in modern history. In 2021, the company acquired Speedway from Marathon Petroleum for $21 billion, adding nearly 4,000 U.S. convenience stores to the network. In 2024, the company faced acquisition interest from Couche-Tard, the Canadian parent of Circle K, in a deal that would have created the largest convenience retailer in the world. Seven & i Holdings rejected the offer and announced restructuring plans to focus on the convenience store core. The company is valued at over $40 billion on the Tokyo Stock Exchange. So here's the whole revenue model in one sentence. Gross profit per store multiplied by store count multiplied by store survival multiplied by category mix. And every single decision at corporate, from new product launches to fresh food programs to store remodels, exists to maximize one of those four numbers. The Slurpee is bait, the brand is the trap, the franchisee is the product, and the convenience store, the thing most people think the business is built on, is the cover story that keeps the gross profit share flowing. So, with all this guaranteed customer traffic, all this captive franchisee loyalty, all this engineered gross profit capture, why do 7-Eleven franchisees ever sign up at all? The short answer is the dream of ownership without the burden of real estate. Out of every dollar of 7-Eleven franchise revenue, an enormous portion is gone before the operator sees anything. A typical franchisee runs on a personal income margin so thin it often disappears entirely. Many 7-Eleven operators work 12 to 15-hour days behind the counter and stay open only because closing means losing the initial franchise fee, the inventory deposit, and the years of equity they have built into a business they do not actually own. About 50% of gross profit goes straight to the corporation as the 7-Eleven charge, which covers rent, utilities, equipment, and the brand license. Another large chunk goes to labor, which has only climbed as minimum wages rise across most American states. A 24-hour store needs at least 3 to 5 employees on shift across the day, plus overnight coverage, plus weekend and holiday staffing. Add credit card processing fees, store supplies, uniforms, training fees, and the periodic equipment upgrades that the corporation mandates and the franchisee co-funds through the open account. Then there's the stuff most people never think about. Shrinkage, which is the industry term for inventory that disappears through theft, employee error, spoiled food, or damaged packaging, runs around 2 to 4% of sales at a typical convenience store, which on $2 million in annual sales is $40,000 to $80,000 in lost product. The franchisee absorbs directly. Fresh food spoilage adds another $10,000 to $20,000 a year, because hot dogs, sandwiches, and fresh fruit have to be discarded daily, regardless of whether they sold. Workers' compensation insurance runs $5,000 to $15,000 a year per store. General liability insurance climbs every year. And then there are the lawsuits, slip and fall accidents on wet floors, overnight robberies that result in employee injury claims, sales of tobacco or alcohol to underage customers that trigger state penalties and license suspensions. The liability insurance climbs every year, and the deductibles climb with it. The franchisee is the operator of record, which means the franchisee carries the legal exposure. The corporation carries the brand. The guaranteed top line is real. Everything below it is a fist fight. That fist fight is where most 7-Eleven franchisees lose, and it has a small set of repeat patterns. 7-Eleven franchises can fail for a lot of reasons, but two mistakes show up over and over again. Mistake 1. Taking on a store with declining sales on the assumption that fresh management will turn it around. 7-Eleven offers existing stores to new franchisees at a discounted franchise fee when the previous operator walks away. The new franchisee sees a brand name they recognize, a building that is already built, and a sales history that looks recoverable. They sign the agreement, inject working capital into the open account, and discover within 12 months that the location was declining for structural reasons. A new apartment complex with no parking, a road realignment that cut off the access driveway, a demographic shift that changed the customer base. The previous operator left because the math no longer worked. The new operator now owns the same problem with fresh debt on top of it. Mistake 2. Underestimating the labor cost in a 24-hour business. The fundamental challenge of 7-Eleven is that the store cannot close. The franchise agreement requires 24-hour operation in almost all locations, regardless of overnight traffic patterns. A store that does 40% of its sales between 6 in the morning and 6 in the evening still has to be staffed for the other 12 hours, which generate only 10% of the revenue but consume nearly half of the labor cost. Franchisees who try to control labor by working the overnight shifts themselves end up burned out within 2 years. Franchisees who pay for full coverage discover their personal income disappearing into wages. There is no middle path. Step back for a second. The economics of this industry are paradoxical. A 7-Eleven franchise has one of the most recognized brand names in convenience retail. The supply chain is fully built. The product mix is fully designed. The store layout is standardized down to the placement of every product category. And yet, 7-Eleven franchisees earn personal incomes that often fall below the salary of a corporate store manager at a competing chain. Why? Because the gross profit share structure captures the upside for the corporation and leaves the operational risk with the franchisee. The charge is rigid. The supply chain pricing is rigid. The product selection is set nationally. Time to pull it all together and answer the actual question. How much money do you make if you do this right? 2 scenarios, real numbers. Scenario 1. A single 7-Eleven franchise in a suburban neighborhood. $200,000 in initial franchise fee and inventory deposit. Annual sales around $1,800,000. After the 7-Eleven charge, labor, credit card fees, shrinkage, and every other operating cost, your real take-home is roughly $60,000 to $110,000 a year, assuming you work the morning or evening shift yourself to keep labor costs down. Payback on the initial investment, 3 to 5 years. Not glamorous, not really a business in the traditional sense. The most demanding small operation you will ever run for the income of a salaried store manager. Scenario 2. A multi-unit operator running 15 to 20 7-Eleven stores across a region. $3 million to $5 million in cumulative initial franchise fees and inventory deposits, built up over 15 to 20 years. Combined annual sales around $35 million. And here's a fun fact most people miss. The economics only start working when you cross the threshold where you can hire area managers, centralize bookkeeping, run shared overnight staffing pools, and negotiate group rates on credit card processing and insurance. Net profit after everything, around $800,000 to $1,500,000 a year, on a 40 to 50-hour work week for the owner. Payback, 8 to 12 years. Then you're earning a real income on a system you built one store at a time. And if you survive long enough, you become something specific. The largest 7-Eleven franchisees in the world operate hundreds of stores and run organizations that look more like regional retail companies than corner store operators. The Thompson family, who founded 7-Eleven in Dallas in 1927, built the company over generations before selling control to the Japanese Ito-Yokado Group in 1991, which became 7&I Holdings. The ones who built generational wealth in this industry did it by operating at scale across many stores, not by trying to make a single franchise profitable on its own. So if you do decide to own a 7-Eleven franchise, just remember the most important rule of this business. The Slurpee is the bait, the charge is the trap. The 24-hour clock is the hook. Make sure you're not buying a convenience store. You're buying a long-term contract that happens to sell hot dogs and lottery tickets.